Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Peace Podcast. Today, I'm super excited because I have Coach Bobby Bluford on the show, and he posts amazing content. And so I've been stalking his page, and so I'm going to let him introduce himself. And today, we're going to get into a word about perspective.
Hey, what's up, guys? Coach Bobby here. I go by Coach Bobby. My name is Bobby Bluford. You can find me on all social media platforms at Coach Bobby Bluford. As the host Carrie mentioned, it is my joy to be here. It is my intent to provide perspective on this podcast. And I've been chasing greatness for a long time. So I'm hopeful this will be beneficial for you guys, and we can all gain some value from it.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm just going to jump right in because I want to make sure that we get to the meat of this. And so we had talked about really giving a word on perspective.
Mhm.
And we know that perspective is really deeply rooted in that inner dialogue. So I want to talk about how it's not just what we see, but it's like what others see and tell us. So when
Right.
you're thinking about perspective in your own story, what are some things that were downloaded into you as perspective, and then some things that you had to shift and change to your own perspective on your pursuit to greatness?
Right, great question. So I always talk about how there's really no reality. Like nothing is real, and everything that we see is seen through a prism or a frame. Right? There really is no reality. The reality is as you said, is framed and relative to what you've gone through. So I grew up a military base kid. My dad was in the army. I grew up in neighborhoods where I was one of, if not the only black kid in the neighborhood. I grew up with a stutter. I grew up skinny. I grew up, with a messed up Jerry curl. So my initial perspective of what I was different, right? I was different. That was probably the earliest word that I attached to myself. And it was never a direct, I don't remember any direct hits in terms of like you're ugly or you're or you're or you're this or you're that. But I just remember feeling this strong sense of being different. And then when I realized that about age 12 I had a stutter, different was kind of the perspective that I took. So what did I do? What I found sports, and sports gave me a framework through which I could control the internal narrative, right? So even now, as I'm chasing, and we'll get into this, I'm chasing a fourth or fifth rendition of who I am. Now I'm in my 50s. Every one of those renditions was framed from that early perspective in sports, and the main switch from different to I control my future, right? And sports, unlike maybe any other endeavor in life, uh, gives you the ability to control what you do, right? I always say in my talks, I'm a speaker now. I say in my talks that in sports, doesn't matter how you look, doesn't matter how you talk, doesn't matter where you're from. All that matters is can you play and can you compete? And so from that perspective, I began to reframe the difference. And now I've kind of flipped it on its head after all these years. And now I've gone back to different being the perspective, but now I use it as fuel and understand that because I've gone through so much, because we're all uniquely gifted from God. So now I frame my talks in that you use your difference as a source of fuel, and you embrace it and you share it in a way that was not possible 40 years ago.
And something that you said, isn't it interesting how when you think about when you were younger and people would be like, oh, that kid's different. It was a flaw to be different, right?
Right,
Because you wanted to
right,
be part of the pack, part of the group. So it's a flaw to be
right,
different. Isn't it interesting how both things can be true? Like when you were different when you were younger, that
right.
made you odd or,
Right.
not part of the group. But isn't it interesting how in sports, when you hear somebody say that kid's different,
Yeah,
it means
yeah,
like,
yeah.
look how good he is,
Great point.
right?
Great point. Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's really taking like whatever that perspective is of the word different has another variation.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you might internalize that word different, but you can make it mean something else, which is
Right.
what you were just saying. Like you can use the flaw of your difference to propel you, but now you're about to be different, which means set apart.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
those two things can be true at the same time.
Exactly. And that's a great point, Carrie. And I think so I speak to all different um perspectives. I speak in a lot of different environments, right? I spoken at correctional facilities. I've spoken, obviously, the sports teams. I've spoken to at conferences, old people, young people, black, white, the whole gamut. And what I teach people or talk about is how there's two things that we are all navigating as human beings. No matter where you're at, no matter how old you are, where you're at, you're trying to survive. Like our brain only knows two things: procreation and survival. That's it. So before we had cars and 40-hour work weeks and podcasts, and before you could go to a gym and build muscles, before muscles even mattered, our brains were wired to procreate and to survive. So everything we do goes back to that brain, the initial brain of our existence. And so when you frame things through that perspective, you understand that we are all trying to navigate our current existence through whatever the currency in that existence needs or is. Right. So I tell parents of young people, like, you might want your kid to pull his pants up and not curse, but that currency might not be valuable in middle school,
Mm,
whether you like it or not, right?
mm,
He or she has to navigate 8:30 to 3:30 in a world that is much different than maybe we want them to be in and want them to live up to. So we're all trying to figure out what the currency in our world is, right? Maybe in a corporate world, it is wearing a shirt and tie. It is speaking articulately. I always tell people I'm a grammar Nazi, right? It's not meant to be a bad word. I love grammar. I love to write, right? But I know when to speak in ungrammatic terms.
mm-hmm.
Like, because I know my audience, I know some things come across better when you don't speak articulately. So understanding what the currency is, and then understanding that everything we do, however we feel about our environment, is a reflection of what is being fed to us. So my muscles only matter because people look at them a certain way. If I was somewhere or I lived 100 years ago when ripped abs wasn't a thing, it wouldn't matter. If I had a 4.0 in algebra and I was super smart, that context does not help me in prison, right? If I was buff and mean and a bad boy, whatever, and that I can survive in the inner city, that does not help me in a corporate board meeting. So whatever the currency is a reflection of how people view us. And so we're always navigating, like, what's the currency? And we're basing that on the reflection that the world gives back to us. And so when you understand that, you don't see anybody else as good or bad. I just see them as trying to navigate what's going on. And part of that, like you said, is when you understand at some point that different was because you felt a certain way, because people never said it, but they treated me differently. But I looked around and all the kids the girls liked didn't look like me, right? But then when you get older, it's like all the guys at the football game or at Costco don't look like me. That's a different thing now. Now it's a different that I feel proud about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And you know what else is interesting to me is and I know we're on this word different, but it's just like fascinating to me the way that this pieces together. Had you been in those formative years, part of a crew or clique, right? Like had you been with the jocks or with the computer kids or with like whatever it is, had you been accepted into those spaces, you would not have been able to, as your 50-year-old self, navigate in and out of the places that you can navigate now because that difference taught you the skills to be able to know when to use the grammar and not, when it would serve you to speak in a certain way so that your message lands differently. So it's really fascinating to me how something that can be perceived as a flaw when you're younger is really you giving you the tools that you need to be set apart when you get to the next phase of your life or the next couple of phases of your life.
100%, 100%. And I speak to that often because you're right. You're so right. There's this term called fallacy of the undetermined outcome.
Mm.
Right? It's an old term from baseball. So fallacy of the predetermined or undetermined predetermined. Fallacy of the predetermined outcome. I almost stutter when I say that. So what it means is very simple. In baseball, someone's on first base, someone's batting. The guy batting has a certain count, whatever the count is, doesn't matter. The pitcher throws the pitch. The first base runner takes off to steal second. He gets thrown out. Right? Very next pitch or a pitch or two after that, the guy who's batting hits a home run. Right? And the naive baseball onlooker often argues that had that person not tried to steal second and still been on first base, it would be a 2-run home run and not a 1-run home run. And so the fallacy is, had he not stolen or tried to steal and got thrown out, every pitch is different. The whole sequence is different. Mm-hmm. So for us to assume that the pitcher throws the same pitch, that the batter swings the same manner, whether or not someone's on first base, is a fallacy. So I always say, for me, and for years, Kerry, I still do struggle with, I wish I had spoken better sooner. I wish I had the courage to do podcasts and speak publicly sooner. I wish all these things, right? Because now I realize it's my gift, mm-hmm. right? But like you just said, I don't go on to be a football player, probably, if I don't have a stutter. I don't go on to have the sensitivity that I have to people if I don't have a stutter. I don't go on to write as well as I do now if I don't stutter. So all those things, like you said, all those things, like you alluded to, all those things are not in spite of me stuttering. They are because I stutter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that makes me think of, the difference between a biblical perspective and a worldly perspective. Mm-hmm. So when we think about that biblical perspective, we're thinking like, instead of why is this happening to me, what is this intended to teach me?
Yes.
And when we think from a worldly perspective, it's really victimizing ourselves to think I'm entitled to this thing. Yep. I'm not getting this thing. And so therefore something has to be wrong with me. And this is the flawed version of me victimizing myself. Where when you think about it from a biblical perspective, it's everything is happening to you for the good. There is a plan. There is the good in this situation. So at what point did you realize, or did it click, that it wasn't the worldly perspective, it was the biblical perspective that was taking you to the next phase of life?
I've always had, a sense. My mom was religious, and we didn't go to church every Sunday, but it was a prevalent theme in our home, right? She was my barometer to God, to religion. So I've always felt like, in some ways, that my path, my life was written, mm-hmm. right? And early on, it was God wants me to be an NFL player, even though the world doesn't see that in me. And then it was God wants me to do this, and now it's like all those things that God did with me, for me, to me, were meant to get me ready for this. But the shift probably came when I had children, mm-hmm. right? So my daughter's 19. She was born in 2004. And I remember thinking, I ain't ready for this, man. I ain't ready for this. Right. And so that's kind of been a theme throughout, but it happened first then. I'm not ready for this. And I told my wife, I'm not ready to, I've always loved children. I've always loved mentoring people younger than me. So I've always loved being around young people, helping young people. So having my own children was always in my brain. But the pragmatic part of me was like, man, I'm not mentally equipped, emotionally equipped to be a dad. Right? This is too much. I could just foresee all the years in front of me before they happen. And I remember saying to God, I don't feel like doing this right now. I ain't ready. And I remember him saying to me, I didn't ask you if you were ready. I didn't ask you what you felt like. And my mom used to always tell me that, I don't want to go through the garbage out right now. I didn't ask you what you felt like. So from that point forward, everything that gave me resistance, everything that gave me discomfort, I've always framed it with that. Like I didn't ask you how you going to feel about this. Right. I got something for you. And as a coach, I understand that. Like, I know when I train my football team that we're doing things oftentimes that they don't like and they don't feel like doing. But I see where we're going. I see where they're going individually. And I know part of that plan that I have for them entails 10 sprints today, entails bench press squats today. So I flip it on myself. I say, look, whatever this is, it sucks. I tell God I'm not ready for it. I don't feel like doing it. And he always just says, look, I didn't ask you how you felt. You are my servant. You are here for me. I got an assignment for you. I don't give it to everybody. You want to be great, right? You want to be great, Coach Bobby, as a child of mine. I got you assigned for these things. And you said you wanted to be great. So this is what it cost.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really like you were saying with the football players that you're training, like it's really they're in the weeds and you have an aerial view, right? Yeah. So like in the weeds, it feels like I don't feel like doing this. I don't want to do this. But the aerial view is like, bro, listen, I know that when you do these things, then therefore this will happen.
So true.
Yeah.
So
and then
true. Yeah.
the other thing is, a lot of times what we're saying when we're saying I don't feel like it is the but. Like, I hear you telling me to do this, but and yeah. someone once told me that if you changed all your buts to but God, then you would no longer have excuses. So it's like, I don't feel like this, right, is your but when you really think about it, it's like, none of this makes sense but God. None of this feels like it's going to get me to this next, expectation that I have, or to excel to this next phase, but God. Right. This training that Coach Bobby has us doing does not feel good and it don't make sense to me, but God. Like, right. There's a plan underneath of all of those excuses.
Right. Yes.
And it's part of God's omniscient view that, he places this like hierarchy of perspective, right? Like, he has the ultimate perspective, but you have like prophets and you have people who can really see his plan coming together, and you have preachers who can feed the gifts into you. And you might even come across somebody that you see on the side of the street who says a word to you, and you're like, oh, I hear God speaking through that person. And all of that is a different perspective. And if you download the right ones, then your perspective starts to broaden to this bigger, like, oh, now I see what God's trying to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. And so for all the viewers watching, I'm not distracted from Carrie. I take notes when I do podcasts, my own or somebody else's. So I want to make sure I'm heavily involved in the moment. So that is so true. It's funny. I talk about conflict often. And I did several talks about this during COVID. And I told people to embrace, and it's so hard, right? We all don't want to hear this. And I don't want to hear it, but I tell people to embrace the conflict that you are currently in. And this is why. There is no great story without conflict, right? There is no Rocky without Apollo. There is no Star Wars trilogy and then another trilogy without Darth Vader, right? There is no David without Goliath. There's no story. If it's smooth sailing, there is no story. Every great story that you love as a viewer, that you, Carrie, love, that I love, every great story we've seen has some conflict. It might be external, it might be internal, but there must be conflict. So if we are to be honest with ourselves and say that I want to be different, right? That word again. I want to be different in this world, in this earthly place before I go off, right? When I go back to where God wants me to be done here, I want my message or my conversation with him to be one that I fulfilled whatever my story was meant to be. And I guarantee you, if we're being honest, we don't believe our story is meant to be average. Our story is meant to be one that doesn't have something that has huge triumph. But to have triumph, there got to be a challenge.
There it is.
To be a champion, you got to face some great opponent. That's just how it is, right? So when you realize that, and then once you go through life and you understand you've already been going through that and already come through that, right? If you pass 20, 25, 30, whatever, if you are that age, maybe even earlier, you have gone through some things that, if you're honest, God has brought you through already. So what I love to tell people is, I say, imagine this. Imagine if you were watching your movie, right, from age 70, 80, 90, or already passed, and you already know the ending, right? You actually watched those parts that were tumultuous and challenging a lot differently. Right? I equate it to, like, I'm a Cowboys fan, so my friends give me a hard time, but I'll watch old Cowboy Niner games. I'm out here in the San Francisco area, so I'll watch all these old games and I know who won. I don't watch the games that they lost, right? But in those games, there are moments when I was watching it initially, something bad happened, and I thought way back when I was watching it live that they might lose. But now that I know they win, those moments where they were down actually give me some joy.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, they were down 14. Oh, they overcame this. And you see it differently. So if we're able to understand in the moment when we're going through the storm that we're going to make it to the other side, we actually enjoy the conflict a little differently. We view it a little differently because we know that when we come through it, it's going to be more honor, right? And more of a testimony to what God is bringing us through.
So good. So good. And you can't have those moments, right? You can't have the moments where you're like, oh God, I see what you were doing there. And you can't get to the next elevation of life until you've done the conflict and the lesson that's attached to it. And right. I think oftentimes, because the podcast is about peace, oftentimes we feel like peace is ridding ourselves of the conflict.
Right.
But realistically, peace is changing our perspective of whatever it is that's happening inside of our space. And so I want to ask you, just personally in your journey, what happened in your life, or what part of your life did you start to see that your perspective was actually aligning you with peace?
In about 10 years from now, maybe. Yeah, so I still struggle. I still struggle because, as I said, really quickly to the viewers, my path, I'll be 51 this year. So my path is going to be a football player in the NFL, played football for 13 years, didn't work out. Went back to school, got an MBA, was going to be a chief financial officer for some huge public company, was a CFO for two startups for a decade. That came to an end. Then I was going to be like this fitness guru, right? The go-to guy on social media for losing weight, for building muscle, all that stuff. That lasted about 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Still doing it. But then I came to this, where I'm using all of that to be a motivational speaker, to be a workshop facilitator, to be a social media thought leader. And so that has come with some sense of struggle with peace, like struggle with understanding, why didn't God give me this earlier? Like for real, God, I'm 51. Now you want me to do this? And seeing how my two children who I love dearly, haven't had every tour they wanted, didn't get every vacation they wanted, didn't get new cars, but I was there for them, as most fathers, or a lot of fathers, can't be. My wife deserved the new handbag, deserved the vacations, and I couldn't do that. So there's some struggle mentally. There's some struggle spiritually. There's some struggle still with peace. But I'll say this: what's helping me to kind of deal with it is conversations with God. And what he continues to tell me more loudly now than ever is that I didn't create you to be like everybody else. Because I'm arguing from the standpoint of look at what they can do. Look at what he can do. Look at what, if I stayed in finance, I could have this, like he has this or whatever. He's like, yes, but JFK faced the same thing, right? Gandhi faced the same thing. Mother Teresa faced the same thing. Michael Jordan faced the same thing. Steve Jobs faced the same thing. So it's not that I'm comparing myself to them, but greatness, right? And living up to an elite level of testimony requires that I don't give you everything up front. And so my peace comes from knowing that at some point he's going to allow me to show everyone who I currently see through my earthly vision, I made sacrifice. He's going to allow me as my defense attorney to defend all of that I put my family and friends through as, look, this is why I had your father do this. This is why I had your husband do this. This is why I had your son, your friend, your coach do this, because I had bigger dreams for him. So my peace comes from knowing that at some point I'll be able to have a testimony so big that it'll make all the struggle and internal strife worth it.
Yeah, and you said two things there. First of all, we're back to that word different, right? And so God is telling you, like, hey, remember when I told you were different
Yeah,
way back when?
yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm
Yeah.
trying to show
See?
you what I really meant by that, right?
Yep.
And then I think something else that you said that really connected with me is sometimes when we're seeking the peace, we really have to own and get internally processed and understood that the thing that we're holding on to that we feel like has propelled us to this point is obstructing us from peace. So like, for instance, when you're talking and you're having those conversations with God, you know that struggle has gotten you to this point. I've struggled with this thing. I've struggled with this thing. I've struggled with this thing. So now you're like, if I have peace right now, will I get to greatness? Because greatness has only come for me through the struggle. So let's talk about that.
That is so true. And whether it's you or Aquarius or this new guy Myron Golden I'm following, we do tend, and I'm, not maybe I can't speak for everybody, but I think we do, but for sure we do tend to associate things we want with having to be paid for through earthly struggle, right? And for me, part of my letting go of some of that and gaining more peace is understanding two things. Number one, that I've been kind of selfish. Like, some of this is for me. Stop lying, Coach Bobby. Stop pretending that you see that God has you here for a reason and you're here to serve. Stop playing, Coach Bobby. Part of it is you like to be looked at and have muscles. You want to be, you want to be a CFO because it's a cool status. You want to be in the NFL because it's cool status. But some of it is because of you, right? So once you are honest with yourself and more importantly with God, he gives you favor, right? He gives you forgiveness once you admit that it's partly for you. Yeah. And then you're right. Then when you look at perspective and you see that you have associated part of your brand with doing stuff that's hard, right? Part of my brand is I'm able to be tough through challenge, whether it's football or studying for my GMAT to go to MBA school or get my MBA or being all those things come with a certain level of respect because their viewers know how hard it is. So we do that, right? So part of letting go of that is understanding that it does not need to be difficult from the standpoint of that being the badge you wear.
Yes.
Like, the difficulty lies in trusting that the work you're doing is the right work and that it's supposed to provide fruit. Like the hardest part of that struggle that you pointed out to me, thankfully and unthankfully, is that when you identify with that, you never harvest.
There it
Well,
is.
I'm gonna do a video today about that. You always plant, you always water, you always toil, but you never harvest. And you can't allow new crops in the way of new blessings to come to you unless you're willing to sit there and accept.
That's good.
But accepting means letting go of the part of the journey that you think is important, which is the work.
Yes, 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 yes. That's so, so good. It's like if I attach greatness to struggle, then rest means failure. But that's not
Exactly.
true.
Not
I've
true.
struggled to get to this point. Now I can rest in knowing that God's doing the work, and I can sit here in peace and wait for the harvest.
Right, right. And that's the hard. And if I've been honest, that's the part I'm just now getting. Again, I have it on my list today to film a video on that. I'm just now understanding that, like Coach Bobby, like you have to let God sit with you for 20 minutes and just look at what you've done and what He's helped you do. If you never do that, why would He continue to give you things if you never sit there and harvest?
Yeah. And you know, it's funny because yours is struggle, mine is perfectionism, right? So like if you're not being perfect, then you don't deserve the fruit. Right. So if you don't operate in perfection, you don't deserve the fruit. And then when people say, well, stop doing that. And I'm like, but wait, that's what made me not a statistic, because I was a mom at 19 and I was a perfectionist. And that's what made him not a statistic, because he had a young mom, a young single mom, and then he went to college, and that, like, perfectionism has served me. So why would I let go of it? And there was a point where I finally realized perfectionism didn't do that. In fact, I would argue that there are times where perfectionism kept you from the fruit because you were so deeply rooted in doing it perfectly that you were afraid to do it at all.
Yeah. Yes.
And
yes.
right.
Yep.
And
yep.
you finally latched on to the fact that it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be what God says. So God says, speak, but I still have a stutter. So what? Do it anyway. Do it afraid. Do it not 100% perfect. But God, this is too easy. So what? I never said you had to struggle to get to greatness. I just said you had to follow me and put in the work. It doesn't have to be a struggle. It might come easy, right? Like getting on stages, talking in the correctional facilities, coaching probably comes way easier to you than it does to the next man. It doesn't have to be a struggle. Why not let it be?
Yeah,
this is my gift to you that's going to produce the fruit.
Right. And what's crazy about that is that you identify with it so much that you're afraid to let it go.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Like you are afraid to let it go. And for me, and maybe it's the same with perfectionism, but for sure, when your identity is work, right? You can't judge that. Like no one can judge good or bad, up or down with work ethic, right? It's undeniable. And so I get caught up in this loop where if I continue just working and never have to turn in my work, I can never have to face judgment. Right. And so you're probably the same thing. If I can continue to get a little bit better here, a little bit more perfect, if you're never done, then you're never submitting yourself for judgment. So I'll just go in circles, like, and just keep working and never allow God to say, look, man, like, and if we're honest, like for me, if I'm honest, I have a thing right here that reminds me. It says, I still remember the days I prayed for the things I have now. And it's there as a reminder, because I don't often feel that way. I forget that me, submitting a bid to speak at a conference I prayed for that. And now I have it. Now it's not good enough. Now it's like, so that is not a struggle, but it's something that I'm still working on with God. I'm trying to have peace with my harvest, have peace with my accomplishments, have peace and understanding that my gift is what it is. And I do not need to be perfect. I do not need to hide the fact that that gift came from imperfection. or from difference, because that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, one final question. How does that inner peace aid in the development of greatness, right? We talked about how struggle can do it. We talked about how work ethic can do it, but how does making that internal peace aid in the development of greatness?
That's a good question. So I did a video last week about finding ways to be humble, and how important it is to fuel your chase. And I was leaving a skin doctor appointment because I have dry skin, and I told the audience on the video that I hated that I have dry skin, but the fact that I had to go there humbled me, because I couldn't hide. I had to like sit here and show the doctor my skin, and like, you have to like take your shirt off, and so I couldn't hide behind muscles and my bravado, right? So the internal peace is important because it keeps you focused on the reason you have the gift, right?
That's good.
Because you need the reason you have the gift, which is God. So when you're humble and you mess up, and by mess up I mean you fall short of being perfect in your chase, and we all do. I stutter. You probably forget something occasionally, right? So my son drops a pass or gets beat in football, and this person might get a B+ on a test, whatever it is. When you do that, you're reminded that you're not perfect, and you're reminded that you're not yours.
Yes.
That gift of academic, greatness, or that gift of speaking, or that gift of singing, when you're not perfect, you're reminded that it's not yours. It's flowing through you, right? And it makes you honor it more, which makes you practice your singing more, which makes you work on your talks more. And so it keeps you in a mindset of servitude, right? It keeps you in a mindset of, this happens to be the gift you gave me. If I don't use it right, I won't have it long. If I don't use it right, I can't harvest. But I think that's where it comes from. It just keeps you, focused on. Yeah, so that brings up the perfect analogy, and I just thought about it. So I don't care how good you are as a farmer, right? You can plant the right seeds, you can water it all you want, you can toil it all you want, but if God stops the rain for 2 weeks, or God gives you torching sun for 2 weeks, your crop will not be efficient. It will not be what it's supposed to be. So I'm reminded when I'm doing things, and I get kind of caught up in myself, when I'm reminded that, yeah, you still have dry skin you have to address, you still stutter on occasion, it reminds me that I'm still at the mercy of God, that my gift that he's given me is still just a gift, no better, no worse than anybody else's, and it's still meant to serve other people. So it makes you quickly understand that you are meant to do this task. And if you forget that task was given to you by me, this is God speaking to me, then I will make sure that you remember it was given to you by me. Because I'll wait for a little bit, or make it not function the right way for a little bit. And so, to your point, having this perspective, back to that word again, that, this gift is a blessing. It's a blessing to have found my gift. Like, the gift itself is a gift. Everyone has their thing. Right? Football wasn't my ultimate gift. For some people it is. Singing, I don't sing. I do dance, but there are things we all do. So the gift is that I found it. The gift is that I was able to have enough patience to discover it. But the gift itself is still not mine. So when you are on this chase for greatness, and you realize that it's still not linear, it makes you love it more and appreciate it, because it's not linear. It will be up and down. But when it goes down, you realize, number one, that you're in a moment of conflict that's meant to be. But number two, it's a reminder that, this is not yours, but I gave it to you to serve. So I want you to keep doing that.
I love that. So the gift inside of the peace is your knowing to turn back to God every time those divots happen. Like the rain didn't come. All right, he's alerting me that I need to get closer to him.
Right.
The thing that I planned to happen, or the thing that I thought was going to happen, or the struggle that I'm going through is too intense. All right, there's my cue. I need to get closer to God.
Right.
And it's
Right.
designed that way, right? He's not going to put us
Yes.
on this perfect path because we both know what will happen. You
Oh, right.
train your brain from God's the man to I'm the
I'm
man,
the man.
right? Like
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
how it works.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so so much for all of those prophetic words. Like that was amazing, and I hope that it really resonates with the listeners. And I also know that we're gonna have to do this again because now I'm
Yes.
like, oh, we should have talked about, and we probably should talk about,
Yes.
and we also
That's
should
how it
talk
should be. Yes. I
about.
agree. I
um,
agree.
so thank you again for joining.